Who are the primary tone setters for the Miami Dolphins, not just for their play on the field and the caliber of how good of a player they are, but for what they're doing in preparation for game day? We're getting into that here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, and NFL staff writer for A to Z Sports. I want to give a special welcome and shout out to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Today on the show, inspired by Jim Harbaugh on Tuesday during his press availability for Chargers minicamp, talked about his group of the Elite Nine is what he referred to them as. And it wasn't just your elite best 9 players on your roster, but it was who are the players who set the tonality for your football team, for their preparation and their training and their preparation in the weight room and their preparation in the film room, and set the tone in that preparation and build up. And then also on the football field are the tone setters for your football team. And Harbaugh was actually gracious enough to list his 9 tone setters that he has that he felt were really like the culture guys, is kind of how you took it. When you heard the full quote in context, these are the guys that kind of embody how we want to go about our business here. And I want to go through the list that Coach Harbaugh had with his roster. I have it up here on the screen. And then I also kind of want to go through both the offensive and defensive side of the ball. And we've talked about a lot of things this offseason, right? We've talked about dogs. We've talked about mentality and physical toughness. We've talked about diversifying how you play the game of football and having more of an edge and young and hungry and more competition and all of those things. And all those things are viable and legitimate, but who are, especially with the leadership vacuum that's in place or is perceived to be in place, I think there's good leadership candidates on this roster. And when you think about Mike McDaniel and how he's gone about trying to be a leader of the team and maybe being a little bit more direct, but not tiger changing his stripes type of thing, and it's still being a player-led locker room. So we touched on this yesterday. Some of the departures kind of give some inklings into who's left. And then going from an old roster to a young roster, you have young players that are hungry, but also impressionable to kind of buy in on the direction that you're trying to go. So when I get through either side of the ball is like, who are those tone setters? Harbaugh's got his Elite 9. And if I was going to make a 9 for the Dolphins, what would it look like? But let's first start with Coach Harbaugh's Elite 9 for his Los Angeles Chargers football team. He had quarterback Justin Herbert, second-year wide receiver Ladd McConkey as the 2 skill players that he shouted out for what they did in the weight room, in the locker room, training, in preparation, and then setting the tone on the field. Rashawn Slater, who's in the midst of looking for a new contract extension from the Chargers. Coach Harbaugh said he came in and told him afterwards that his conditioning test was too easy, right? Because Slater trains hard, and that's why he's a part of the Elite 9. Joe Alt, second-year offensive tackle. That's got to make you feel good. You're an NFL franchise, and you get your first and your second-round draft choice at offensive tackle and wide receiver are already those needle-moving tone setters. Now, there's some potential. It's not maybe necessarily slam dunk at all the spots yet, but there's some potential for a lot of the Dolphins' young players in last year's class to be well represented in a Dolphins version of the Elite 9 or the tone setters. Zion Johnson, interior offensive lineman. So 3 offensive linemen was considered by Harbaugh to me amongst that top tier group of Zion Johnson. Chargers fans, if they didn't hear the quote and they just heard the Elite 9 and saw Zion Johnson, Chargers fans kind of took an exception to it to say he's not an elite football player, but it's not just about how well you play on Sundays, right? It's how well do you set the temperature in your room. Zion Johnson gets credit from Coach Harbaugh for that. Khalil Mack and Tuli Tuipulotu, two edge defenders, guys that play on the line of scrimmage, rush passer. Diane Henley, dynamic, young, athletic linebacker, has really emerged into a really special player for the Chargers. And then Derwin James, kind of long in the tooth vet. Those were the 7 guys: Herbert, McConkey, Slater, Alt, Zion Johnson, Khalil Mack, Tuli Tuipulotu, Diane Henley, Derwin James. Harbaugh's defined elite 9. And he said, people are trying to get up into this group. There's always room for more guys in this group. But as of right now, that's kind of how I feel our group and pack of leaders from a culture perspective, a training perspective, a prep perspective, a demeanor perspective. They're the ones who set the temperature of our rooms. And it's a nice blend for the Chargers of, you obviously have a quarterback on this list. You've got youth on this list. You've got each position room. I mean, you got a skill player, you got a quarterback, you got offensive lineman, you got defensive lineman, you got a linebacker, you got a defensive back. There's a good collection of and representation across a lot of groups. And I'll give you a spoiler alert. I don't have every position room well represented for the Dolphins. I think there's some rooms that have some pretty good candidates. And if you had to only pick 9, some guys that might get left off in some position rooms. But then there's at least one position room right now that I'm looking at that I very clearly don't see anybody that would be represented in the Dolphins iteration and version of this, based off of what we know about the team, what we know about their trends have been, what we know about what players they're looking to keep, where there's been some reported issues. And then you have a really good body of work for some other guys. So some of it's surplus in some rooms, and some of it is maybe lack of a steadying hand in another room. So we're going to get into that next here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. I have the Dolphins roster up, and I'm looking at my 9. I have my 9 defined, but I want to go through each side of the ball and identify those candidates. We're going to do that next here on Locked On Dolphins. So make sure that you guys stick with us. What you guys would say about is sticky notes, scribble plans on the fridge, overlapping calendar invites. The Skylight Calendar is here to bring clarity to the chaos and help your family stay organized throughout the stress of your work schedule and doctor's appointments and kids' sporting events and the family coming to town and whatever else, you name it. The Skylight Calendar has a sleek digital display that syncs with all of your existing calendars, including Google, Apple, Outlook, and more, making it simple to track appointments, practices, dinners, and reminders all in one easy-to-see place. What if you could eliminate the excuse of I don't know from your family's daily routine? Make sure everybody's where they need to be and take the stress out of the day-to-day. Right now, Skylight is offering our listeners $30 off their 15-inch calendars by going to skylightcal.com/NFL. Go to skylightcal.com/NFL for $30 off your 15-inch calendar. That's skylightcal.com/NFL. Not a math guy, but I can spell Skylight Cal, and I can also count to 9. I got enough fingers and thumbs to get there. So we're gonna give it a shot for the Dolphins and their own version of this Chargers concept of an elite 9, your tone setter players. Offensively, Tua Tagovailoa, I think, certainly goes on this list when you consider the what it looks like without him, for starters. But you hear a lot of players and they talk about Tua and the unique personality he brings to the position, and he's growing into continuing to have a greater mastery of the offense and how that allows him to impress on his players. He is each year had very specific and explicit, like, physical threshold goals for things that he wants to pursue. And some of them have been well suited to him being on the field more. And some of them probably in retrospect were things maybe you'd want to have a mulligan on trying to change, but there's always been a reason for why he showed up in camp the way he showed up in camp. And for Tua Tagovailoa specifically, I think the biggest thing that I can point to as why I feel very comfortable saying Tua, even though he doesn't have the physical stature of Justin Herbert or some of the other quarterbacks across the league. I talked to Joe Marino. We locked on NFL scouting, and we did one of these for the Bills, and obviously Josh Allen's on that list. And those guys are guys that have more freedom to be a tone setter with their physicality and making plays. And you have seen Tua try to do some of those things, and that's where it's kind of jumped up and bit him in the rear end. So the interesting thing that I have for Tua is how else can you continue to impress that on your teammates without putting your body in positions to take the kind of undue wear and tear that you're just frankly not ideally built to handle versus a 6'5", 230, 240 pound quarterback. Right. But if you have any question about Tua and his love of the game and his temperature setting ability and the prep and the work, just reflect on all the different objectives he's come into years with in camp and how he's successfully been leaner or heavier or learned how to fall or whatever. And everybody thought the jiu-jitsu thing was dumb. And you watch him out on the field and he's doing chin tucks and rolls, getting pushed over all season long. So that's the kind of prep that really stands out to me. And it's a guy who's willing to literally leave it all out on the football field. And that to me is somebody who really embodies the spirit of what this exercise is about. So I put Tua in my Elite 9 absolutely as tone setters and temperature setters for the Dolphins, especially when you know what it looks like without him. I had two other skill players that made the cut for me. One of them that did not make the cut is one of the big variables for this football team this year, and that's Tyreek Hill, right? Tyreek came to the Dolphins having really refined and built his game with how his work and his preparation had been done off the field and in the offseason, and how he maintained his speed as a guy who was going on as many years in the league as Tyreek's been in the league. But at the same time, you can't go through a season where you openly admit you haven't practiced enough and the problems that we've had with Tyreek and put him on this list. If he can get back just for the next 8 months, be the best version of Tyreek Hill in every phase and facet, I think it would go a long way. But we're sitting here talking about potentially running a track meet out in California tomorrow. So it would have been a time and place where temperature setter, Tyreek Hill, prep, training, working out could have been in this conversation. He's not anymore. And if he's so inspired by how disappointing his individual season was last year, to channel that of himself for the next 8 months for this year, it could be a big needle mover and variable for the Dolphins. I don't have him on my list. Fullback Alec Ingold, though, the hitman, made my list. He's one of the unsung heroes, and Mike McDaniel yesterday touched on it, the successes of the run game being a causation and not a correlation of just him playing banged up and what it means to the team and the point guard role that he fills in the run game. Anytime you get those dirty work type players, and listen, I'd love to run more successful play concepts out of 11 and 12 personnel, and Alec Ingold is obviously a fullback, so there's some stark differences there in the implementation. But as far as leadership within the room, the prep, the passion about the game, I think Alec Ingold deserves a shout on this list. And then I think Jalen Waddle's getting there. I see, Tyreek Hill's out jet setting and playing Fortnite and running track and doing whatever else and getting in some trouble. Jalen Waddle's staying in South Florida, going to Panthers game, and I'm seeing him with a whole bunch of training videos this offseason, working on his feet and his routes and trying to get better. And he's emerging. He's kind of matured into a player who's in the mental and physical prime of his career. And the Dolphins offense is at its best when Waddle's cooking, in my opinion. So those were my three skill players that I did choose to represent here: Tua Tagovailoa, Alec Ingold, and Jalen Waddle. Especially Ingold. All three of those guys are tenure guys that have been here. For offensive linemen, I could see Patrick Paul working his way into this stratosphere, especially if he kind of takes a jump this year based off of everything we've heard about how he's kind of transformed his body and what he's doing to capitalize on the opportunities of his rookie season. And he's very quickly ingrained himself into running in the leadership circle of this football team. And he's obviously a very mature young man. And I'm really impressed with how he says things and how he works, but it's got to be followed with play, right? And quality play. So I think Paul's a name to watch, not as necessarily as it's a very different story when you look at Joe Alton and the Chargers and how he stepped into that job and commandeered that job and was so good at that job right away, right? Like Pat's not there. But you knew that with how raw Pat was despite being a 4-year starter. And that was some of the question about Pat. But one thing that I'm very comfortable with Pat Paul right now is Pat's going to do everything from a prep and training standpoint and an intangible standpoint to try to get himself to be the best version of himself. And I think Austin Jackson, who is another short list name for me in that regard, it's just have a hard time putting James Daniels on the list because he's rehabbing from an injury, so we don't really know. And Mike McDaniel said that yesterday as well. I see better than I hear. And I finally got to see him applying the things we go over in the film room outside of his rehab into some individual period type stuff. So it was good news for the Dolphins yesterday. But Austin Jackson has developed progressively and has a very similar demeanor. I think these are both very intelligent, Pat Paul and Austin Jackson, very intelligent guys. Austin's still young and he's unfortunately been dealing with some injuries, but how he went about getting healthy and the rehab process and finishing ahead of schedule so he could be full go for OTAs is what you would want. The guy I do have on this list is Aaron Brewer, though. Brewer has the responsibilities of playing the center position and running point on all the calls on the protections and the fronts and the combination blocks and everything else that goes with being the centerpiece of the offensive line. And to come in the way that he did last year and work as hard as he did and then have an injury that prevented him from participating in a large chunk of training camp and then come in and still be ready and then play as well as he did. And he's another guy who has ingrained himself into the leadership group of this football team. I got Aaron Brewer on the list. Austin Jackson was a hard one to leave off. But Tua Tagovailoa, Alec Ingold, Jalen Waddle, Aaron Brewer, the 5 offensive players that made the cut for me on my Elite 9 tone setters, culture guys that you're looking to kind of facilitate the next chapter, assuming that this team performs at a level or above a level that we expect them to earn continued trust into the next chapter of Dolphins football. Defensive side of the ball, we got a loaded group and we got a bare naked group that we're going to get into. We're going to get into that next here on Locked On Dolphins. So make sure you guys stick with us. NBA playoffs are in full swing. Every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't miss moments, whether it's a game-winning shot or breakout player. There's never been a better time to get in on all of the action than right now. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways to play than ever to win smart and to play and win big. Me personally, looking at a couple NFL futures. And if you like plus value, if you think the Dolphins are going to overachieve this year, Dolphins have the 3rd best odds to win the AFC East at plus 700. They've fallen significantly behind the New England Patriots at plus 500, which I'm unbothered. I think that makes the Dolphins a better value play than New England. Buffalo, obviously, minus 250, should be considered the overwhelming favorite. But, injuries happen. You never know. And in a position where if Buffalo falls back to the pack, they get somebody key that gets banged up And if you think the Dolphins can overachieve this year, plus 700 might not be a bad play. They'll throw a couple bucks on it. So food for thought. If you're new to FanDuel, now is the perfect time to sign up. You can head to FanDuel.com, place your first $5 bet. And if it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. So make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. The defensive side of the football, oh boy. The defensive line has a lot of temperature setters in it, in my opinion. And you very quickly felt Bradley Chubb. And Bradley Chubb yesterday was very candid about whether the team walked the walk or just talked the talk last year about getting to know each other and being invested in each other and doing the right things. And the talk this time of year is all fine and dandy. And I'm in the boat with everybody else that says I'll believe it when I see it on the field. Right. But one thing that's not deniable, one thing that's very easy to feel is the weight that Bradley Chubb carries within the Dolphins for his leadership. He is a very front-facing, forward-facing voice for this football team right now. And it's a voice that they did not have last year. And having to rehab the way that Bradley did, and knowing the character that Bradley has, and then knowing that the road that he was on and not taking it for granted, I think for me, he's a no-brainer for the sense of, again, it's not how elite have you been, how recently to be a part of this list. It's how do you go about what you do to set the example for others. And when you are a player-led locker room, having those right voices in those right places is an essential piece of the puzzle. And I think Bradley Chubb is a major addition. Now, there's been subtractions, and there's going to be rooms where you're not as talented as you were last year. Look in the secondary, and I don't think there's any question of that. But nevertheless, Bradley Chubb's emergence, and as somebody who's been here for an extended period of time and serves as one of those bridges and ambassadors between the players and the locker room, and being in the trenches with the guys this year is a big difference. And I think Jalen Phillips, you could say the exact same thing for. Jalen Phillips is one of the most outstanding men in that locker room. And again, we're here to play football games, not win Boy Scout badges. And I get that, but Phillips and what he's been through and how he's handled it and the grace that he's handled the adversity that he's been dealt the last couple of years with how good he is when he's at 100%, and how his game grew from what he was as a rookie to what he's become. And the entire path, you go back to college, and the Dolphins had him for 3.5 games last year. These two guys, I think, are part of the Dolphins' Elite Nine in the same concept of what the Elite Nine is for the Chargers. The Dolphins didn't have any of it last year outside of 3.5 games of Phillips in September. So if you're trying to find those pathways of optimism and where this season could go right, this is a very easy place to look. And I would put Chop Robinson in this bucket. I would. From everything that I have heard publicly, privately, press conferences, personally, getting to know and see and hear how Chop goes about his business, I feel very comfortable putting him on kind of that list of where Coach Harbaugh was willing to put Ladd McConkey and Joe Alt as guys that do everything the right way, and they train their rear end off, and they are, and Mike McDaniel talked about it today on his press conference. I waited to record today's show hoping I was going to get some really compelling stuff out of Mike today. And Mike did some interesting stuff, but it wasn't like groundbreaking, earth-shattering X's and O's techniques type stuff like he gave us yesterday. So I see, I'll do the Harbaugh bit today. And in doing so, he said, you're either committed to and invested in getting better or getting worse. And Chop Robinson, I think, is on that track. And you saw it throughout the season last year. So 3 edge guys: Chubb, Phillips, Robinson. Zach Sieler also represented on this list. Again, he didn't have the silver. He wasn't a Jalen Waddle or a Bradley Chubb or Jalen Phillips or Chop Robinson or a Tua Tagovailoa, right? Tua was drafted 5th overall. Waddle was drafted 6th overall. Bradley Chubb was drafted 5th overall. Jalen Phillips was drafted 18th overall. Chop was drafted 21st overall. Austin Jackson, who was on the short list, the honorable mentions list, was drafted 18th overall. Zach Sieler was a 7th-round draft choice. Came out of Ferris State. He's had to scratch and claw and fight and personally invest in himself to develop everything he has gotten at every corner of his career in the NFL. And you saw what it looked like up front without him in the 2 games, the only 2 games Zach Sieler has ever missed in his Dolphins career. Arizona and Buffalo last year. Tua Tagovailoa comes back. Javon Holland's hurt. Kader Kohou's hurt, misses both of those games. Zach Sieler's hurt, misses both of those games due to a freak injury in practice where he fractures his orbital bone. It's just, you couldn't have made it up. It was a perfect embodiment. It really was a perfect embodiment of just all the different odd, silly, goofy ways last year sucked from start to finish. But Zach, the path and the journey that he's been on to becoming the player that he is now, and how productive of a player he is now, and how well developed of a player he is now. You don't get to be there. You don't get to be here from where you started without having all of that proper investment. And for that reason, Zach was one of the first names I wrote down to kind of go through and go about a Harbaugh-inspired Dolphins Elite 9 for tone setters, culture setters, lead by example players who also do it on the field and show up on the field. The last name I have is Jordan Brooks. So Brooks came in here, played at times hurt and banged up. Brooks came in and commandeered the marquee linebacker spot from David Long and played. I don't care what his Pro Football Focus grade is. I don't care what the number says on the site or what the analytic. If you watch a film and you watch the responsibilities that Brooks had to be given in an exotic defense that put a lot of pressure in a lot of different alignments and a lot of different styles of responsibilities, pressure responsibilities, coverage responsibilities, fitting the run responsibilities. And then you parlay that and how he did that in his first year with kind of the quiet but intense demeanor that he brings, with what the play looked like, with how he's kind of commandeered one of the leadership spots on the defense. Brooks was one that I thought deserved to be on this list as well. There are no defensive backs right now. And that's also the group that got completely gutted the last 2 off seasons between Howard and Ramsey and Holland and Brandon Jones and Deshaun Elliott being let walk in free agency. And it is a group, Kendall Fuller being here and then being cut. This is kind of the hodgepodge group right now. Who steps up? Is it Cater? Is it Iffy? Is it Ashton Davis? Is it Dante Trader? Is it Patrick McMorris? Is it Elijah Campbell? Is it Cam Smith? Is it Ethan Bonner? Is it Isaiah Johnson? Is it Storm Duck? Who is it? Or is there a vet that you feel like could come in and maybe set the tone and the example for all of these young guys, these young and hungry guys, and set the right example? That's a big mystery. But you don't have the Derwin James. I look at some of the other teams that I've done this exercise with. Taron Johnson with the Bills as a defensive back. Marlon Humphrey with the Ravens. Those kinds of teams that I've started to kind of tinker with this with. Dolphins don't have that player. And they probably need it. Where do they find it? Be interesting to watch. But that is my Elite 9 inspired by Jim Harbaugh and the Chargers, with his kind of tone setter, culture setter players and his building and how it breaks down positionally. So my final group was Tagovailoa, Ingold, Waddle, Brewer, Chubb, Phillips, Robinson, Sieler, Brooks. And as Harbaugh said, there's room for plenty more, but you got to come up and get it. You got to earn it. And a couple more of those players emerge for Miami, and you might find yourself in a surprising spot when it's all said and done. But you got to go out and play the games, and you got to walk the walk, not just talk the talk every single day. That's going to do it for us here today on the show. Kyle Krabs, you enjoyed this peek at the Dolphins as we wrap mini camp and get ready for the long quiet before the start of training camp in a little over a month. So you can keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day, even during the dead of summer. Hope to see you guys again tomorrow. That's it for me. I'm out of here. Go Fins.